But taking a break from politics now. We're at the end of June, and that means Pride Month is almost over. And it was a big month for New York's transgender and gender expansive community. Before they left Albany, state lawmakers passed a bill that would create a new transgender wellness and equity fund here in New York. That bill is now waiting for a decision from Governor Kathy Hochul. For more on that, I spoke with Elisa Crespo, Executive Director of the new Pride Agenda, an LGBTQ advocacy group. Elisa, thank you so much for being here. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, Dan. Thank you for having me.
Of course, anytime. So the state has now created something called a Equity and Wellness Fund for transgender New Yorkers and transgender Americans maybe coming to New York. Can you kind of lay out what this money will be used for? We got $1 million in the state budget. So what will that $1 million go towards?
So right now it's going towards nonprofits that are either led by trans people or whose mission is to serve trans people, or organizations that have programs that are targeted towards the gender expansive community. And it's being used for all sorts of things, for health and human services, capacity building, cultural competency training. It's going to be administered by the Department of Health, and eventually will become a RFP process where nonprofits will be able to apply on their own and hopefully receive grants for their programs that target the gender expansive community.
Can you talk about some of the unique needs that the trans community faces in New York and beyond? I think in New York, we have a lot of unique issues facing our trans community that are often, I don't want to say overlooked necessarily, but I feel like people at the state level and at the federal level may not be familiar with it. So I'm interested to hear what you have.
Yeah, so I think that we are moving in the right direction. I think more and more people are learning about the disproportionate levels of housing insecurity, of homelessness, of incarceration, of chronic health conditions. Just to give you a little bit of statistics, 1 in 3 trans women of color experiences living with HIV. Almost half of all Black trans women in America will experience incarceration at some point in their life. And the average annual income of a trans person of color is about $10,000 a year. So we have these really strong anti-discrimination protections in New York. But what does that mean if we're not actually providing the necessary funding to improve the quality of life of trans people? What does it mean if we're not doing enough to really provide gainful employment and permanent housing for trans people? We also saw during the pandemic that trans people suffered the most with respect to food insecurity. So these problems are still alive and well in 2022.
Why do you think the trans community faces these unique issues to them? Is it just systemic transphobia? Is it a history of disinvestment? What goes into this that has caused these outcomes?
I think it's both of those things. I think it's systemic transphobia. I think it's people's misunderstanding, sometimes even within our own community. And I think there's, we're also seeing attacks nationally across the country in certain states like Texas, Alabama. That resonates with people across the country, and they then become emboldened and empowered to discriminate openly against trans people. And so it doesn't help that we are seeing these things happening in other states across the country. But these things have been going on forever. And I think that, people just misunderstand the stories and the lived experience of trans people.
Yeah, you mentioned these things happening in other states. For New York, we do have really strong anti-discrimination laws, but is there anything else that you think New York should be doing in response to these other states enacting anti-trans laws and regulatory action and executive action in some states as well?
Well, I know there are some bills out there that would make New York a refuge state for trans people who live in other parts of the country where they're being targeted, where trans youth are being attacked in sports or have been banned from receiving gender-affirming care. So that's a step in the right direction. I don't think that bill was passed this most recent session, but I think that's important to send a strong and clear message to the rest of the country that we welcome trans people here, that trans people belong here in New York State. Also, we're really excited that New York is the second state in the country to have a statewide Transgender and Non-Binary Wellness and Equity Fund. And $1 million is a great start, but as you know, Dan, it's not enough. So we hope that next year during the budget process, we can get to that 15 or get as close to it as possible. Because part of what this fund is supposed to do is invest in new and emerging trans leadership. And the reason why that's important is because trans people know how to take care of ourselves. We know how to solve our own problems. We don't need to be saved. And so when you invest in the trans community and the nonprofits that serve us, everyone in our community benefits. And we hope that it will lead to higher wages, to gainful employment, and to permanent housing for trans people.
So what else is on the agenda for next year when the legislative session starts in January? Obviously you have the Wellness Fund, you're pushed to put it up to $15 million. What else is on your agenda to do for LGBTQ New Yorkers in Albany next year?
Yeah, so there are a number of things that we were not able to accomplish this year. One of them is to protect LGBTQ seniors who are living in long-term facilities. Another one is to make New York the first state in the country to decriminalize consensual sex work, which is something that is very associated with the LGBTQ community, particularly trans women of color who engage in survival sex work. And we also are looking to pass a bill called the Gender Identity, Respect, Dignity, and Safety Act, which provides protections for transgender people who are incarcerated in the state of New York. Make sure that they get proper commissary items that are aligned with their identity, make sure they're addressed by the proper pronouns, making sure they are housed accordingly. That's another thing that was passed in the state of California that we're trailing behind on, but I think next year will be the year that we get it done.
All right, Elisa Crespo from the New Pride Agenda, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much, Dan.